Berachot, 6th chapter, Mishnah Aleph, first Mishnah. Amru Chachamim, the sages said, Asur lo le'adam sheyehne min ha'olam hazeh belo bracha. It is prohibited for a person that is going to take any enjoyment of this world without making a blessing. V'chol hanehne min ha'olam hazeh belo bracha. And anybody who takes any enjoyment out of this world without a blessing, ma'al, he did me'ila, which means he used holy objects. It's like using the objects in the temple not for their intended use, for your personal use. Ke'ilu nehena mekochei shamayim. It is just like you use a cup of Beit HaMikdash that was supposed to be for sacrifices and you use it for your own use. Shene'emar, because it says, where do we learn this? LeHashem ha'aretz umlo'ah. It says, the land with everything in it belongs to God. This is from Tehillim. Ve'od amru, and they said one more thing in Masechet Brachot. Kol hanehne min ha'olam, anybody who takes enjoyment of this world, belo bracha, without a blessing, ki'ilu gozel la'kadosh baruch hu et birkato. It is like he is stealing away the blessing from God. He owes God the blessing and he stole it away. And not only to God, he stole it. Not only is he stealing from God, Vele Knesset Israel is also stealing from the Jewish nation. Why? Because of his action when he partake, for example, of a fruit of this world and didn't make a blessing. What happened to all the other fruits from that point onwards? Shaperot lokim al yedei cheto. Because then all the other fruits are going to be of a lesser quality because he didn't make a blessing. From here we learn that there's an obligation to bless before you enjoy anything in this world. And when was it decreed? It was decreed at the time of the men of the Great Assembly, after the destruction of the temple. Before the destruction, the high court in Yerushalayim used to be of 70 men. After the destruction of the temple, when Mordechai was, by the way, part of the men of the Great Assembly, so they uplifted the number from 70 to 120, and these were the men of the Great Assembly. They decreed many decrees. So this is one of the decrees that they decreed. So according to one opinion, this is only a rabbinic rule that came from the time of the destruction of the first temple. Some learned it from the Torah itself. It is an obligation from the Torah. Where is it written? It says, Kodesh Hilulim LeHashem. It says, holiness of praises in plural to God. Melamed, from here it teaches us, Shetuanim bracha lifnehem velacharem. It says two prayers, a blessing before you partake of the food and a blessing after. Klomar, which means כשיאכל אדם פירות העץ בשנה הרביעית, when a person will eat the fruits of the tree. Obviously, in the first 3 years, he's not allowed to eat the fruits of the tree. It's called orla. So when he eats it on the 4th year in Yerushalayim, שהם מותרים באכילה, that there they are permitted in eating, again in Yerushalayim, יאכלם בשני הילולים. He has to eat them with two praises. לפניהם ולאחריהם, a praise before and a praise after. מכאן אמר רבי עקיבא, from here Rabbi Akiva learned, אסור לאדם שיטעם כלום קודם שיברך, that a person is not allowed to taste anything of this world before he makes a blessing. So that's another opinion. You learn it from the Torah, it's not from the thing. ויש לימדו, and there are those who learned, החיוב בברכה לפני המזון, the obligation of making a blessing before Birkat HaMazon, bekal v'chomer, with how much more so? What does it mean? Birkat HaMazon shelachar HaMazon. We learned it, the Birkat HaMazon, from the blessing of the food that comes after the food, that's a blessing that is stated specifically in the Torah itself. Shechiyuva min HaTorah, k'ma shekatuv, that this is the obligation from the Torah itself. Just like it's written, ve'achalta u'v'savata u'berachta, it says, and you should eat and you should be satiated and then you should bless. כשהוא שבע מברך, so you learn it how much more so. What is how much more so? If God commanded you to bless when you're satiated, שהוא רעב, לא כל שכן. When you're hungry, how much more so? There's a commandment to bless. ועוד למדים בגמרא, and also we know another place in the Gemara, מפסוקים שונים על החיוב שחייבים לבאר לפני המזון. From many verses that you need to bless before eating any food. ברם, but nevertheless, even though we brought many proofs from the Torah, עיקר החיוב אינו לומד דברי סופרים. The main obligation is from the rabbis. כמו שהבנו למעלה, it was decreed by the men of the great assembly. משנתנו באה ללמד, our Mishnah comes to teach us, אלו ברכות תקנו חכמים על אכילות פירות וירקות. Which blessing did the sages establish on eating fruits and vegetables? So let's start. כיצד מברכים על הפירות? How do we make a blessing on the fruits? We're talking about לפני אכילתם, the blessing before we partake of them. על פירות האילן אומר בורא פרי העץ. On the fruits that come from a tree, we say בורא פרי העץ. We said the whole blessing, כלומר ברוך אתה השם אלוקינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי העץ. Blessed are you God, God of the universe, who created the fruits of the tree. וכן בברכות אמורות להלן, and also all the other blessings that are going to say, we're going to mention from here onwards, אלא הועיל ותחילת הברכות משתף לכולם. But since the beginning of the world, ברוך אתה השם אלוקינו מלך העולם, blessed are you God, the God of the universe, that's equal in all blessings, לא הזכיר דנה את תחילת הברכה. So he didn't mention the beginning of the bracha. He says בורא פרי העץ. Obviously he knows that you're going to say ברוך אתה השם אלוקינו מלך העולם before. אלא ספר ברכה בלבד, because that's the only thing that changes. So only the ending of the blessing changes, so therefore the Tana of the Mishnah, the person who wrote the Mishnah, only mentions the end part. ששונה הוא בכל מיני מינים, because the end part is different in each blessing that, as we're going to see soon. So everything that comes from a tree, by the way, a tree means that the fruit grows on the same, it's not the size of the bush or of the tree. It means that the tree is there all year long, and the fruit regrows on the branch of the tree. That makes a tree, which makes, for example, grapes. That grapes grow on the same tree, even though it's a small tree, it's considered to be a tree and not a vegetation. For example, chutz min hayayin, but on the wine, if you eat the grapes, you say borei pri ha'etz. But if you make from the grapes wine, then you make a special blessing. Chutz min hayayin, hana'asa ma'anavim, that is made from grapes. Shal hayayin hu omer borei pri hagafen, because on the wine, a person is going to say, borei pri hagafen, the one who created the fruit of the vine. ואף על פי שאמרו שהיוצא מן הענבים הוא בכלל פרי, even though we have a rule that if anything that comes of the fruit is considered to be fruit, והענבים הרי ברכתם בורא פרי העץ, and so therefore for the blessing for the anything that comes out of the grapes should be borei pri ha'etz, blessed the creator of the tree. מכל מקום, היין שהוא סועד את הלב משמחו, nevertheless, wine is special. Why? Because wine makes one's happy. קבעו לו חכמים מתוך חשיבות ברכה בפני עצמו. The sages established, because of its importance, a blessing on its own, בורא פרי הגפן, the one who created the fruit of the vine. So up to here, we did בורא פרי העץ, the fruits on the trees and the grapes. ועל פירות הארץ, what about the fruits of the land, which means vegetations, כגון, for example, kidneys, all kind of legumes, קישואים, cucumbers, אבטיחים, watermelons and similar וכדומה, on all these things he says, בורא פרי האדמה, the one who created the fruit of the land. יש מעירים, there are those who mention, שהברכות נתקנו בלשון המקרא, that the blessing is in the way of the Torah, the way it's written in the Torah, borei pri ha'etz, to bless the fruit of the tree, create the fruit of the tree or create the fruit of the land. ואילו בלשון המשנה נקראות פירות האילן. The Mishnah calls it the fruits of the trees, האילן, not העץ, he uses a different word. Or פירות הארץ, it doesn't say אדמה in the Mishnah, it calls it eretz, which is a similar word to אדמה. ומכאן שינוי הלשון במשנתנו על פירות האילן, הוא אומר בורא פרי העץ. That's why it says in the Mishnah, they used to call a tree ilan, so it says on the fruit of the ilan, of the tree, he says borei pri ha'etz, created, the one who created the fruit of the tree. Tree and ilan are similar words. ועל פירות הארץ, הוא אומר בורא פרי האדמה. And the fruits of the land, he says, they created the fruit of the land. In other words, the land and adama, aretz and adama are similar words that is mentioned, one in the Torah, once in the Mishnah. Okay. Again, there's an exception to the rule. When we're talking about adama, what's the exception? Chutz min hapat. Except from the bread. The bread is made out of wheat. And you should say borei pri adama on the bread. Or on the mezonot. Halechem she'al hapat hu omer, because of on bread, a person has to say, not hamotzi lechem, borei pri adama, created, the one who created the fruit of the land, but one has to say, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, the one who took out bread from the land. Again, why is wheat special? Kelashon hamikra, leotzi lechem min haaretz, just as it says in Tehillim, to take bread out of the land. It says, why is that an exception? Sho'il ve'alechem hu ikar mezonot ha'adam, because bread is the main food for the person. Without eating bread, one doesn't get satiated. It's the main meal, as you call it. Kav'u lo mitoch chashivuto bracha le'atzmo, because it is such an importance that it is such of an importance, it was designated a blessing for himself. Ken kavu chachamim bracha miuchedet asher daga, not only to bread did they designate a special blessing, anything from the 5 grains, kegon, itriot, for example, pasta, ptitim, kuftot, vechadome, all kinds of concoctions, baked goods you would make for the 5 kinds, barley, wheat, and all those. וכן למאפה בצק, כגון דופנים ועוגות, for example, cakes and so on. נוסח הברכה, בורא מיני מזונות. For that, you say, בורא מיני מזונות, the one who created types of foods. ועל הירקות, כגון כרוב, צנון, and all the other vegetables that we would call them leafy vegetables. For example, lettuce, or כרוב, צנון, חסה, for example, בצל, onion, תרד, Tered is spinach and similar. Omer borei pri adama. He says borei pri adama. So in other words, anything else that is from the adama, he said borei pri adama. Sharakot bechlal perot haaretz, because the vegetation are part of the fruit of the land. Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. It says, if it's a leafy vegetables, for example, lettuce, or it's, for example, spinach, which you eat the leaves itself, you should designate it as to say that you're eating the leaf, and you're not eating the fruit. So Rabbi Yehuda says, borei minei deshaim. So if you eat spinach, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to say, the one who created kinds of grasses. Sheledat Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, היה צריך לברך על כל מין ומין ברכה מיוחדת. You have to distinguish, according to Rabbi Yehuda, between when you eat a leaf or when you eat a fruit. When you eat something else, a fruit of the land. שיהיה קר המין בלשון הברכה. It says you have to show that there's a difference by the way you eat it. So there's going to be a difference when you make a blessing on the leaf or when you make a blessing on the fruit, according to Rabbi Yehuda. But ein halacha keRabbi Yehuda. The law is not like Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore we don't make a distinction between making a blessing on leaves or fruit.